Okay, let me turn this down a little. There we go. Hello, hello, hello. That's a little better. Okay, so now we finally made it to the point where we're going to take a look at the big kahuna, the application page. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so when you go into the App Manager, there's a list of applications that we can assign privileges, roles, and user values, and approvers, and blah, blah, blah. So here's a couple that I just created, the demo app. So you see this has a lot more tabs in it than the ones we've seen previously. So here we can add the privileges. All right, so like I said, I like to create the tab panel. And so here's these two tabs are basically the application table itself. Okay, so if we want to change these, we would do that, save it, and there's our application saved. We can have a URL. We can say internet yes, and we can save these. And of course, when we go back, these are all in sync. And so these two tabs here are part of the actual application table itself. So if we go look here at the form we're using, you see that the basic tab is using just standard Struts2 stuff. The options tab is just using standard Struts2 stuff. And here's the tab panel now where we have more than one tab. And you notice that each target is another div. So we have the basic tab, target, basic options tab, target, so just another div ID, and that's how JQuery knows where they are. So, and of course the rest of them here now are all doing grids. Okay, so we have embedded grids in each one of these. All right, so we're taking it a little step further than the previous one, and what we're doing here is we're also taking the customization a little further. So let's take a look real quick at our database. So if we go here, we can create the table. So here's all the SQL you would use to create the table. So again, this is Oracle. So what I do is I downloaded the Oracle 11G virtual machine, and I have a VM running on my Linux box somewhere here in the house. And so that's what I'm using for this. I'm also using SQL Developer to do all the work. So I just copy and paste that in the SQL Developer and let it go, and it creates all the tables for me. I also have one that will create the actual database, data spaces, and everything else. So you can run these, and you can see what the password is, and it sets up all the grants and things like that you need in order to load the table and the data, of course. So here you create the table. And then you'll see where, here's the application table. These are the first two tabs. Everything in the first two tabs is in here. Then we have the application owner table, which would be here. And then we have the application priv table, which is here. And we have, so all these are associated to an application ID that as their foreign key relationships. Here's the app role owner. That's here. And then the app user values, that's here. And again, all these are associated by the foreign key of the application. And then we have privs and roles, and these are based off of the other previous videos with the priv and role pages. And then here's the priv role tab, ties these privs roles together. And here's the user values here. So well, user values are separate, so you can add user values and then tie user values to the application. So this is the separate table for the user values. And well, actually I think this one is the combined one, and the one up here was the separate one. So you see how all of these are put together, and then we just have separate tabs to basically join those tables together. So okay, so let's take a look at the privs. Now the difference here that we're doing is when you add a priv, you can have a different way to edit. Now when we did the privs page back here, this one, we had the roles tab, and when you added a role, we didn't, or edited a role, we didn't want you to change the value of the key, so we disabled the select box. We still had created the select box, but we disabled it, and you were only able to change the status. Well, here we're going to get a little more advanced in that we're going to completely tailor the form. So, and we're going to use JavaScript to do that, and we're going to have different various ways to plug in to the tag lib. And it's, again, this is all JQuery. I mean, you can do this without the tag lib if you so desire. And you'll see that we have a lot more JavaScript now, but I don't think it's near as much as we would have otherwise. So, so let's take a look now if we wanted to edit these guys. Okay, so actually creating one is the same. So we have a priv ID here. All right, let's just add another one. So we can add another one, and our form is basically the same. If we tried to add the first one, we still get our duplicate message like we were getting before. And the difference here now is when we go to add, we're not disabling the select box. You see, we created the priv ID as a read-only field. So I'm typing, but I can't change anything. The only thing I can do here is change the status. Okay, and then I can scroll through them. You'll see that it matches up the selected item. So we can change that. We can go here and we can change that. And then we can, back up and we can switch them back if we want. So let's make the first two active, and we'll leave the other one inactive. Okay, so we have, so how do we do that? Okay, if we go back to our page here, we don't need this anymore. Let's take a look at this. So when we look at this, we see here's our tabs and here's our priv grid. Okay, here's our app priv grid. Now you'll see we're using recreate form equals true again. We're doing that on both this time, and the reason we're doing that is because we're going to completely modify these column values on the fly. So what's coded here is going to change. Okay, of course I left these here as documentation so we can see how we're starting out, and basically what these new functions are going to do is customize these two values completely. So now when we add a record, we're going to use this before init data method to completely customize the value, and basically we're just going to force it to look just like it does here. And the reason why we have to do that is because if we go to edit these records, our before init data function is going to completely modify these again. Then if we go back and try to add a record again, of course the last thing we did is going to be what's left. So we have to keep resetting everything back to the way it was in order for it to work the way we want it to work. So that's why we're using recreate form on both, because we want the forms to get recreated every time so that we don't have to keep modifying all the other stuff. So, and once again, the other methods we're using in here are the after submit, we're calling to do our check grid value just like we were doing before to check for our custom messages. Before submit is setting up our model so that when we actually submit the form, we want Struts2 to get a model with the values as opposed to setters for each individual field. Okay, so let's go take a look at our add app priv function in JavaScript, and that's where it is here. Okay, and you see we're just setting it again to look exactly like it does in our tag lib. Okay, the difference being here is now we also have to calculate our URL where we're going to load our select options. Okay, so here's how we're going to get our hidden application ID value, and it doesn't look like we need it here, but this is how you would do it. We'll need it eventually in the other ones, you'll see. So here's our JSON URL, so it's my data URL, so that when we construct our edit options, we're giving it the URL, which is different in how we did it down here, because here we're actually using this part. So we're using this to point it here to our URL, but we're still using the same build select options to create the select box itself. And this is no different than we saw in the priv video. It's basically just this thing just parses the JSON data coming back from here and creates the select box that gets pumped into this privno field. So nothing different there. The only difference here is that we have the ability now to completely customize the columns. Okay, so if we go back and look at our JavaScript again, you'll see that what we're doing is we use the ID of the grid, and we're using the JQuery functions to set the column properties for the Privno field, and we're setting the edit type to select with the edit rules, edit hidden true, because the field is hidden on the grid but we want it editable in the form. And what we're doing here is basically using a list of key value pairs to display the select box, so the user sees the actual ID value but doesn't see the key, but when the form is submitted we get the key and not the value, which is what we want. And if you've done web development, you understand how that works. And then here what we're doing is we want the ID basically invisible in that form, and that's how we're getting that here. Now when we actually click the pencil to edit one of the records we've selected, we're basically reversing it here. We're making the ID visible and we're hiding the no, but we need the Privno to be there because when we update the record we actually need the key, not the value. We just want the user to see a read-only field for the value and still allow them to just edit the status field and change that. Hence the recreate form is true, so we can keep all those things the same and have it rebuilt every time. And then, like I said, after we submit the form, this function gets run, and then we're taking the post data values and creating our model. And then Struts2 will deal with our model, populating this model, rather than us having getters and setters for every little field on this form, which is something we really don't want, because we want it to populate the model of each of our models. Okay, so let's take a look, and then here's how we're doing our selection box. Here's our priv select, and we're building that right from that JSON response. Again, these are just building HTML, and again, it doesn't matter what you use for the name. Okay, so let's see, I've already been going for about 12 minutes. Okay, so let's take advantage of something else here, and rather than move on to the next tab, well, we'll do that in the next video. I'll take a look at our Hibernate. Okay, this Hibernate class here, this manager Hibernate DAO, is handling everything on this page. Okay, so all the inserts of the app privs and the app owners and the app role owners and the app user values, and all this is being handled in this manager. So what I tend to do, I don't really use a lot of the annotations for relationships in the model. Like the application model won't tie all of these together. It won't use the one-to-many annotations that Hibernate has. I like to code the queries myself to go get them. And in the action classes, it'll call these and passing values that I need. So in other words, if I want to get all the application role owners for this application, the action class will call this, pass in the app ID. I'll build the query as a prepared statement, but a Hibernate flavor of it. And here we're going to set the app ID that we've defined here. Okay, and we're going to set all the scalar values. These are the values that we're going to return to our model, that we want returned to our model, and their types. And then what we're going to do is we're going to tell Hibernate to transform this result set into this model, and then we're basically returning a list of this model back to the action class, which eventually gets pumped back into the page. Okay, so I do that for all of these. You'll see that there's a lot of queries in here to get run, and Hibernate calls this concept native queries. So we're running native queries into Hibernate. And the reason I found that the reason why I do this is because Oracle is a little funky with some of the things, and Hibernate just wasn't doing it the way I wanted to do it. So this seemed to work a little better in that aspect. And the other thing is I didn't want to have the model populated with all of these things in one get. Now I'm pretty sure you can handle that with some kind of lazy init technique, but I just didn't want to deal with that. So I just have separate models for each of these tables, and then have queries that return those models in the flavor that I want for this query. Now that doesn't mean I'm not using Hibernate. I certainly am. Some of the, like for example right here, I'm using a Hibernate query just to get the app user values for some other things. So you know, I just kind of bounce back and forth, but I prefer to use the native query method myself. So so we took a look at that, and I think I'm going to stop the video here. We're at 15 minutes, and I'll come back, and in the next video we're going to move on to the next tab, and things are going to start getting a little bit more complicated, as you see. See y'all.